My lazy wife's father died, and she inherited his house and $33 million. She kicked me out saying, "Find somewhere else to live or die. I don't care. You're useless now." Days later, the lawyer laughed. "Did you even read the will?" My wife went pale because the will said, when we got married, she said, "As long as we have each other, we'll never be poor." Turns out, that promise had an expiration date right after she got rich. I remember the day like it was yesterday. Emily and I met in college. She was that girl who could light up a room with just a smile, the kind of person people instantly gravitated towards. Funny, smart, ambitious, she had dreams bigger than most of us, and I loved that about her. We dated for 3 years, and when she finally said yes, I thought I had hit the jackpot. Life was simple then, almost innocent. We were broke, sure, but we had each other, and that was enough. In the beginning, our life was normal. We didn't have much, but we made do. I worked part-time at a local electronics store. Emily tutored kids in math, and somehow we managed our tiny apartment, weekly takeout, and the occasional movie. She was my partner in every sense, cooking together, laughing over burnt toast, planning weekends on a shoestring budget. We were young, in love, and naive enough to think that love could solve everything. But love, as it turns out, doesn't pay bills, and ambition, when left unchecked, can twist into entitlement. I remember the first cracks appearing like faint hairlines in glass, subtle, almost ignorable. Emily started talking about quitting her tutoring gig, saying she was too smart for it, that it was beneath her. I tried to reason with her, telling her it was steady income and flexible hours. She laughed, waved her hand, and said, "I don't care about small money anymore. I want bigger things. Don't you want more than this?" At the time, I brushed it off. I thought it was a phase, something she'd grow out of. By the time we'd been married for 2 years, the phase had fully blossomed into something else. She quit tutoring altogether, claiming she was exploring her potential, while I picked up extra shifts nights at the electronics store and weekends delivering parcels. I didn't complain. I loved her, and I wanted her to feel fulfilled, but the weight started showing. She didn't help around the house anymore. Dishes piled up, laundry sat untouched, and the apartment that used to smell like warm toast and cinnamon now smelled like stale air and takeout containers. She blamed me for everything: the broken toaster, the slightly chipped coffee mug, the fact that we couldn't afford a vacation to Europe. Her words shifted from playful teasing to cutting remarks. "You never think big enough," she'd say. "You're fine with being mediocre. I'm not." And I began to see it. Emily wasn't just ambitious anymore. She was demanding, insatiable, and cold. I worked harder, hoping she'd appreciate the effort, hoping the smile that used to greet me after a long day would come back. But it didn't. She became a stranger who shared my bed but not my life. And I stayed because I thought maybe love was enough. Maybe if I gave her everything, she'd remember who she once was, who we once were. Then came the news about her father. He'd been estranged from Emily for years. From what she said, it was a messy fallout, some old argument, some unhealed wound. I didn't pry. Emily had always spoken about her dad with a strange mix of resentment and longing. And then, one morning, she called me at work, her voice trembling, a strange edge of excitement hidden under fear. "My dad, he's sick, really sick. I think I should go see him." I didn't question it. I knew how important this was to her. We got on a plane the next day. She spent hours on the phone with him, crying, reminiscing, maybe even trying to make up for lost time. I sat quietly in the corner, feeling like a spectator in her emotional play. I wanted to be involved, to comfort her, but she didn't see me there. She didn't notice me. And when he passed away 2 weeks later, I felt like a ghost in her grief. The funeral was strange. Emily cried in long, dramatic bursts, hugging distant relatives I didn't know, while I helped organize, drove the rented car, held her hand when the tears got too heavy. Everyone kept saying how much I helped, how much she must appreciate me. But Emily's eyes never met mine. Her father left her a mansion and $33 million of fortune that could change everything. And she turned to me, smiled, and said, "I don't need you anymore." I remember standing there, numb, as she spoke. It wasn't just a passing remark. It wasn't a frustrated comment after an argument. It was cold, final, and precise. $33 million later, she had no use for the man who had supported her through college, who had worked his ass off while she watched Netflix and shopped online. I tried to reason, tried to tell her that money changes nothing between people who love each other. She laughed. Not a gentle laugh, not the playful sound I used to love. It was sharp, dismissive. "You're useless now. Find somewhere else to live or die. I don't care." I thought my heart had stopped. Every memory, every sacrifice, every night I stayed up to make sure she had what she needed, every small act of love vanished in an instant. I was supposed to feel proud, or at least grateful, but there was nothing left, just a hollow pit of disbelief and rage. I walked out that night, with the clothes on my back, a suitcase I didn't even pack properly, and a sense of betrayal so deep I didn't think I'd ever recover. The neighbors stared as I loaded my small car. Emily waved from the mansion steps, not a tear, not a word, just cold indifference. I didn't look back. I couldn't. And yet, even as I drove away, a small bitter thought lodged itself in my mind. She'll realize what she's lost. One day, she'll realize. I don't know what people expect when they hear a story like this. Sympathy, rage, advice. All I know is that for years I had believed in the woman I married. I believed in her heart, in her smile, in the promise we made when we were too poor to care about anything but each other. And now, that promise was meaningless. $33 million, a mansion, a life she inherited, and I had nothing. I spent the next few days in a cheap motel, wondering how someone I loved so deeply could turn so cold, so fast. Friends called, offered couches, offered listening ears. I accepted some, ignored others. Part of me wanted to confront her, to make her feel what I felt, but another part, the part that still loved her, still remembered her as she used to be, was afraid. Afraid of what she'd say, afraid of how hollow her eyes had become. The house she inherited wasn't just a building. It was a monument to her father's life, a reminder that wealth without compassion can destroy even the closest relationships. And Emily, she had chosen the wealth. I spent the nights thinking about every little thing, how she laughed at my jokes when we first met, how she cried on my shoulder during hard times, how she promised me the world while we had nothing. And yet, in one cold, final moment, she told me I was useless. That was the turning point. That was when I realized love isn't always enough. Sometimes it takes years of sacrifice only to be discarded when someone decides you've outlived your usefulness. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I felt a spark. Not revenge, not yet, but clarity. I would survive this. I would rebuild. And when the time came, Emily would understand what she had thrown away. For now, I had nothing but my pride, my work ethic, and the bitter taste of betrayal. And honestly, that's enough to start. I had nothing, not even a toothbrush when she kicked me out. But what I did have was something she didn't, a conscience. The first night after Emily threw me out, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my friend Ryan's couch, staring at the peeling ceiling, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. My clothes were wrinkled, my shoes scuffed, and my pride shattered. Every word she'd said echoed in my head. Find somewhere else to live or die. I don't care, you're useless now. I repeated it like a mantra, trying to grasp the reality, trying to make sense of how the person I had loved the most could turn into someone so cold. Ryan didn't say much when I showed up at his apartment. He just handed me a towel and a change of clothes. You can stay as long as you need, man, he said, and that was enough. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe, if only temporarily. Days bled into nights. I took whatever work I could, get odd jobs, freelance gigs, anything that would let me scrape by without relying on the person who had once promised to love me unconditionally. I ate cold cereal for dinner, showered when I could, and tried to keep my mind busy. But Emily was everywhere. Not physically, but in the whispers, the social media posts, the news I stumbled upon. Apparently, she had thrown some sort of celebratory party at her new mansion. Pictures leaked online. Emily, laughing with a glass of champagne in hand, surrounded by people I didn't know, wearing dresses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She drove around town in a brand new car, waving to anyone who would notice her fortune. And if I hadn't known better, I'd have thought she'd been rich her whole life. Every post felt like a punch in the gut. But I didn't cry, didn't retaliate, didn't post anything dramatic about how she'd ruined my life. I had something she didn't, a conscience. I wasn't bitter because I wanted revenge. I was bitter because she had mistaken her privilege for power, and it had made her cruel. A week later, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered hesitantly, thinking it might be some telemarketer or scam. Mr. Harris, a cheerful voice said, "This is Catherine Moore, attorney at law. I handle the estate of Mr. Robert Whitman. May I have a few minutes of your time?" I froze. "Whitman, Emily's father?" I nodded, unsure what to say. "I'll get straight to the point," she continued. "You are listed as a secondary beneficiary in Mr. Whitman's will. I'd like to schedule a meeting to go over the documents with you." I laughed a hollow, humorless laugh. "Secondary beneficiary? You've got to be kidding me. I've been kicked out of the house. She's flaunting the money everywhere. Why would I?" "Please, Mr. Harris," she interrupted gently. "Just come to the office. You'll understand when you see the will." By the next afternoon, I was sitting in a polished, high-rise law office, fidgeting in a chair that was far too big for my anxious frame. Catherine Moore, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a wry smile, gestured for me to sit. Emily arrived not long after, looking as if she had stepped out of a magazine, designer clothes, perfect hair, and an expression that combined arrogance and irritation. "So this is him," she whispered to the lawyer, her voice dripping with contempt. "The useless man who can't even keep a toothbrush in his apartment." I didn't respond. I simply looked at her, remembering all the nights I had stayed up worrying about her, all the meals I cooked, all the small acts of love I had done without expecting a single thank you. Catherine Moore opened the will, spreading it across the polished mahogany table. She glanced at Emily, then back at me, and laughed a soft, incredulous laugh. "Did she even read the will?" she asked, looking at Emily as though she were some sort of child caught stealing candy. Emily froze, a flush creeping across her cheeks. She opened her mouth, probably to argue, but no words came out. Catherine cleared her throat and began reading. "The inheritance left to Emily Whitman, consisting of the estate, mansion, and all monetary assets totaling $33 million, is conditional. The conditions are as follows. The inheritance shall remain active only as long as Emily remains legally married to her husband, Mark Harris. Should Emily divorce, abandon, or otherwise cease cohabitation with her husband, the inheritance shall transfer entirely to Mr. Harris, secondary beneficiary. I felt the blood drain from Emily's face. I had read the sentence twice before I fully processed it, but when I did, my mouth went dry. I wanted to laugh, cry, and scream all at once. My entire body felt heavy and light at the same time, like gravity had turned off and someone had hit rewind on my life. She looked at me, panic in her eyes, as if I had some sort of control over this invisible, unspoken force. She opened her mouth to speak, but all she could do was stammer. What? That can't be right. It's right, the lawyer said, calm but firm. Your father clearly stated his wishes. He admired Mr. Harris's character and his steadfast support for you over the years. This clause was added specifically to protect him from any abandonment. Emily's hands shook. She gripped the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. I didn't know he couldn't. Apparently, he could. I said softly, my voice steady, controlled. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but nothing prepared me for the satisfaction and disbelief that coursed through me. The room was silent for a long moment. I could hear my own heartbeat. The will, something I had never expected to protect me, was suddenly my shield. Everything she had thought she had, the mansion, the wealth, the power, was conditional, and she had triggered the condition herself. You can't do this, she shouted finally, panic rising in her voice. I need that money. That's my inheritance. It's not yours anymore, Catherine said calmly. Legally, it transfers to Mr. Harris the moment the conditions are met and abandoning him meets the conditions. I looked at Emily, and for the first time in months, I felt nothing but clarity. The woman who had turned her back on me in a moment of greed and entitlement was now facing the consequences. I could almost hear the walls she had built around herself cracking. What if I'd come back? She asked, desperation creeping into every syllable. You already abandoned him, the lawyer replied. The conditions are met. There is no coming back. Her face went pale, the color draining so quickly it was frightening. All the luxury, all the power, all the pride she had used to push me out of her life meant nothing now. The will had flipped everything. My heart, which had been broken, now felt vindicated. Not cruelly, but fairly. I took a deep breath, finally letting a little of the tension leave my body. For so long, I had been invisible in her eyes, a man whose hard work and loyalty had been dismissed. And now, legally, morally, and emotionally, the scales had tilted. I was no longer the useless one. Emily's voice broke as she whispered, I didn't know. I shook my head. You knew enough. You knew enough when you kicked me out, when you laughed at me, when you decided I wasn't worth keeping around. This isn't about the money, it's about everything you threw away. Catherine closed the will, sliding it into a folder. Mr. Harris, you have every right to the estate. I suggest we begin the paperwork immediately to ensure the transfer is smooth. Emily slumped into the chair behind her, staring blankly at the polished floor, realizing that wealth isn't power when it's built on someone else's devotion, and that devotion can be written into legal documents too. For me, it was a strange mix of emotions. Relief, disbelief, and a quiet satisfaction that only comes from seeing justice done without needing to raise a hand. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I simply sat there, taking it all in, knowing that after months of heartbreak, homelessness, and betrayal, the truth had finally revealed itself. And Emily, well, she was learning the hard way that money alone doesn't buy love, loyalty, or respect. That day, I realized something profound. Sometimes, life gives you a second chance, not just at wealth, but at dignity. And sometimes, the people who abandon you find themselves staring at a reality far harsher than anything you could have imagined. For years, she treated me like a burden. Now, she needed me to survive. The days after the lawyer's revelation were strange. I wasn't elated, exactly not the way you see in movies. No triumphant music, no dramatic fist pump. I was calm, cold even. I'd spent months being used, humiliated, and abandoned, and now I had clarity. Emily's world, which had been all glitter and arrogance, was starting to crack, and I was just observing. Of course, she didn't see it that way. From the moment we left the lawyer's office, Emily went into overdrive. It was like watching a panicked animal trying to cling to a cliff's edge. First came the calls. She called me repeatedly, leaving messages I didn't answer, then texts, long paragraphs, full of desperate apologies and manipulative sentimentality. I made a mistake, one message read. I didn't mean it. I love you. Please just talk to me. I can fix everything. Another one. I was wrong to treat you like that. You've always been the only person who cared about me. Don't leave me. We can start over. It was nauseating. Not because the words were empty, they were, but because the person who had written them had spent years erasing my worth. Every insult, every lazy remark, every night I worked while she did nothing. It was all still there, all still raw. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at most of the messages. Part of me wanted to, just to savor her panic, but another part, the part that finally remembered its own dignity, knew that responding meant giving her power again. She tried other tactics too. Gifts started appearing at Ryan's apartment. Carefully delivered packages, jewelry, designer clothes, expensive watches. I held them in my hands once, examined the tags, the receipts, the price, and tossed them into the trash. If Emily thought I could be bought after everything she had done, she was sorely mistaken. Then she showed up at my temporary place once, dripping in perfume and anger, her eyes darting as if trying to read my soul. Mark, she said, almost pleading, almost commanding. "We can fix this. I can make it right. Please, you don't understand." I cut her off. "I understand perfectly. You abandoned me, Emily. You threw me out. You laughed at me. You told me I was useless. And now you want to pretend nothing happened because the money is slipping through your fingers? Too late." Her face went pale again, more than it had at the lawyer's office. Her hands trembled, and I noticed a flicker of fear in her eyes, the kind you see when someone realizes the rug they've been standing on for years is gone. I called Catherine Moore a few days later to finalize the transfer of the estate. We sat in her office while she walked me through the documents. She smiled gently, as if she'd seen this story unfold 1,000 times. "Mr. Harris," she said, "your wife's actions have already triggered the conditions. Between the eviction texts, witnesses who saw her abandon the property, and verbal admissions, the process of transferring the estate to you is already underway. Legally, there's nothing she can do." I nodded. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt empty. I wasn't a vindictive man. I didn't want her to suffer. I just wanted what was fair. And fair, after everything, meant she had to face the consequences of her own choices. Meanwhile, Emily's world was unraveling fast. Her friends, the ones who had only ever been around for parties and photo ops, started disappearing. Invitations she sent went unanswered. Social media posts that once garnered likes and praise now met with silence or thinly veiled mockery. She called them, begged, cajoled, and even threatened. Subtly, nothing worked. They had already left her. She wasn't the charming Emily anyone wanted to be around. She was a desperate woman, panicked at the collapse of her glittery illusion. Debts began to pile up too. Her credit cards had been maxed for months, and without me to manage the household budget, the same one she had always ignored, bills went unpaid. Utilities were cut off temporarily. Her car, a symbol of status, got repossessed because the insurance lapsed. Every little piece of her perfect life was crumbling, and she had no one to blame but herself. Meanwhile, I learned more about her father. Turns out, he had always liked me. Even when Emily treated me poorly, when she was moody, distant, or self-absorbed, her father had seen my efforts, my loyalty, my care. That clause in the will wasn't just a legal trick. It was his way of protecting someone he respected, someone he knew truly loved his daughter. It was a strange feeling, inheriting not just the wealth, but also the approval and trust of someone I had never really known that well. $33 million, a mansion that smelled faintly of Emily's childhood, yet untouched by her greedy hands. All of it suddenly belonged to me. I moved into the mansion slowly, deliberately. I didn't rush to redecorate or flaunt my new life. The house had history. Every corner had memories, birthday parties Emily had forgotten, her father's old study lined with books I'd never read, the kitchen where I had once cooked meals for a woman who would throw me out. I walked slowly through each room, letting it sink in. I wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to claim what was rightfully mine and to remember the lessons I had learned. Emily tried to follow. She appeared outside, lingering near the gates, her eyes wide, desperate, angry. I didn't answer her calls. I didn't respond to the texts. I ignored the bouquets of flowers left at the door. She was learning, finally, that money without integrity is meaningless, and that you can't force someone to stay when they've already been abandoned. Days turned into weeks. Her spiral accelerated. She lost more friends, more social status, more of the fleeting power she thought money could buy. Every attempt to manipulate or bribe me failed, and through it all, I remained calm. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I just lived. I worked. I'd organized the estate. I made investments. I rebuilt myself on a foundation she could never touch because it was built on character, not entitlement. One evening, Catherine Moore called me. "He would be proud," she said softly. "Your father-in-law always respected you. He left you more than money. He left you his trust." I thought about that. Trust, respect, integrity, things Emily had tried to replace with shopping sprees, designer clothes, and empty words. It struck me then, fully, her father hadn't just written a will. He had taught a lesson, one that would outlast wealth and arrogance. And Emily, she was left with nothing but the wreckage of her own making. $33 million, a mansion, a life she had inherited all gone, or rather, never hers at all. And for the first time, I felt a calm satisfaction. Not revenge, not cruelty, just justice. I spent that night walking through the mansion, touching the walls, the furniture, imagining what it could have been like if she had been kind, if she had been grateful, if she had treated me like a partner and not a stepping stone. It was bittersweet, but necessary. I had lost her as a wife, yes, but I had gained myself, and with it, a life that was finally free of her toxicity. For years, she had treated me like a burden. Now, she needed me to survive, and she realized, too late, that I didn't owe her a single thing. Every luxurious gesture she attempted, every plea, every attempt to reclaim what she thought she owned, failed. She had abandoned her husband, and in doing so, abandoned her own inheritance. I leaned back in the study chair, the will on the table beside me, and finally allowed myself a small smile. $33 million, a mansion, and a clear conscience. That was everything she had thought she could use to hurt me. And yet it became the very thing that freed me. And Emily, she could watch. She could scream, plead, and cry. But it would change nothing. The game was over. For the first time in months, I slept well that night. Not because I had won, but because I had survived and survived with integrity. She built walls between us, Now I lived in the house her father built, and those walls echoed with her regret. Moving into the mansion was surreal. I remember standing in the grand foyer, my hand brushing against the polished wood banister, the scent of aged mahogany and leather mingling in the air. The house had always belonged to Emily's father, a man who had somehow seen through all the chaos, all the selfishness, and recognized the one person who had genuinely loved his daughter. That recognition had been written into a single clause in a will, a clause that transformed my life overnight. The mansion itself was enormous, more space than I could ever imagine using. Each room told a story. The library with its shelves of books Emily had never read, the study where her father had likely pondered the future of his fortune, the kitchen that had hosted countless family dinners I had never attended. It was overwhelming, but not in a way that felt excessive. It was quiet, dignified, a testament to a life built on thoughtfulness and legacy rather than flash and show. Catherine Moore, the lawyer who had guided me through the will's labyrinth, stayed for the first week to ensure everything was handled properly. She laughed gently whenever Emily tried one of her last-ditch efforts to reclaim something, anything. "She's running out of time," Catherine said, once sipping her coffee as she reviewed the documents. "Legally, there's no way she can contest the transfer. You have all the leverage now, all of it." I didn't need leverage. I didn't crave revenge. I just wanted peace. And yet, every day, Emily's attempts at reconciliation reminded me of what she had been and what she would never be. At first she sent emails, then texts, then she appeared at the gates of the mansion as if proximity could undo years of betrayal. "Mark," she said one afternoon, her voice trembling with a mix of panic and pleading, "please, we can work this out. I didn't mean any of it. I can change, I swear." I stood on the balcony above, the sun glinting off the marble floors, and looked at her like I was seeing a child throwing a tantrum. "Emily," I said slowly, "this isn't about changing, it's about seeing what you did and understanding the consequences. You chose your greed over us. You made your bed, now you sleep in the consequences." She fell silent, her fingers clutching the iron gate, her face pale. I knew she wanted to beg, harder, to cry, to manipulate, but I didn't give her the satisfaction. Not a word, not a glance. I let the walls of her father's house do the talking. They were filled with history, integrity, and quiet dignity, things Emily had always lacked. Months passed. The mansion transformed from an intimidating space into my home. I learned to navigate it, to inhabit it fully. I hired staff, a housekeeper, a gardener, someone to manage the paperwork, not for luxury, but for order. The estate wasn't just money, it was responsibility, and I treated it as such. I invested wisely, expanded businesses I had been too tired to start before, and slowly, a sense of stability seeped back into my life. Meanwhile, Emily's world crumbled. The friends who had laughed at my supposed incompetence vanished when her influence failed to open doors. Creditors became persistent. Luxury cars were repossessed. Parties stopped. Social media posts went unanswered. The lavish facade she had built on the foundation of my absence collapsed like a house of cards. And through it all, she had no one to blame but herself. One evening, I received a call from Catherine Moore. "You know," she said softly, "your father-in-law would be proud. Not of the money, not of the mansion, but of the way you've handled this, with dignity." I thought about it. The man had recognized the difference between love and convenience, between loyalty and laziness. He had trusted me when Emily had doubted me, and in a small, meaningful way, I wanted to honor him. I used a portion of the inheritance to create a charity in his name, a foundation dedicated to education and support for children from broken homes, kids who, like me once, had nobody to rely on except themselves. It felt right, like closing a circle. The money, which Emily had thought would define her, was instead going to create opportunities for people who actually deserved it. Emily eventually stopped coming around. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't even attempt the occasional social media appearance near my life. I didn't chase her, I didn't gloat, I simply moved forward, building a life that was rich not in wealth, but in integrity, purpose, and quiet satisfaction. Sometimes, when I walked through the grand halls of the mansion, I would pause in the study. I'd touch the books, the desk, the family portraits, and remember the lesson embedded in this inheritance. Money wasn't just wealth. It was trust. It was recognition. And above all, it was clarity. Her father didn't give me money. He gave me clarity. He saw what Emily could not. That true wealth lies in character, in loyalty, in love that doesn't demand repayment. And losing her, as painful as it had been, turned out to be the richest thing that ever happened to me. I had once thought the mansion would feel empty without her, that the silence of its rooms would echo with loneliness. Instead, the silence was peaceful. The walls, once intimidating, felt like a shield. They weren't haunted by her greed anymore. They resonated with the wisdom of a man who had understood what really mattered and the life I had rebuilt in his memory. I sat in the study one late evening, sipping tea, looking out at the perfectly manicured gardens, and finally allowed myself to exhale. I didn't need validation from Emily, from the world, or even from myself. I had everything I needed: dignity, security, and the knowledge that I had lived rightly when others had failed. The house her father built had become my sanctuary, and the walls she had once used to separate us now echoed only with her regret. A sound I didn't need to hear to know I had won the only victory that mattered. In the end, money never made her happy. Money never made me happy either, not by itself. What mattered was integrity, love, and the choices we make when no one is watching. Her father saw that. I lived that. And Emily, well, she was left with nothing but a lesson she would carry forever. And as I sat there in the quiet glow of the mansion's lights, I realized the truth. Losing her wasn't a tragedy. Losing her was a liberation. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.